Welcome everyone back to the Real News Network. I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore. 129 people were killed in Paris this week in an attack ISIS has claimed credit for. But amid the calls for solidarity with France and President Hollande's promise to avenge the fallen, there may be an issue with historical memory at play here. Glen Ford, founder and executive editor of Black Agenda Report, is back with us for this week's edition of the Ford Report to discuss this and much more. Glen Ford, welcome back to the Real News.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jared.
So as you watch the post-attack media fallout of sorts and the coverage and the conversation about what's happened in Paris, what is it that you see going on or what may be going on from your perspective?
Well, I think we can put it this way. The French, and this goes for the British and for the Americans too, they're like pyromaniacs who've set a fire that they can't control. And that fire is the fire of Islamic fundamentalist jihad, a jihad that they have carefully stoked for nearly 4 decades, ever since the CIA and the Saudi Arabians, with the cooperation of the rest of the Europeans, invested billions of dollars to create the international jihadist network with its headquarters originally in Afghanistan. The attacks, I think, in Paris are just the latest examples of blowback, only this time on imperial soil. Before that, there was, of course, the subway and bus attacks in London, and, of course, 9/11 here in the United States. But these should all be seen as self-inflicted wounds. France has a whole lot of history to answer for. It's terrified of what it calls the self-radicalized youth among France's large Arab minority. But these people, and I want to point out that they are stopped and frisked on the streets of Paris and other French cities at higher rates even than Black Africans of French descent, or rather Black Africans who are now French. These young people were radicalized by French racism, and French racism is a product of French imperialism. The French foreign minister was at the meeting of the G20 this weekend, and he claimed that the French were singled out, that they were singled out for attacks in nightclubs because the French like to dance. Well, the French have never been very famous for their dancing, but they are infamous for having killed 1 million Algerians in the 1950s and 60s in trying to put down the Algerian quest for independence. When the French say, as they are now saying, that this weekend's violence was the worst on French soil since World War II, that is a straight up lie. The French police back in 1961 attacked a peaceful demonstration of Algerians and massacred 200 of them and threw scores of their bodies into the Seine River. The young French folks who are the grandchildren of those Arab victims don't need to be self-radicalized or taught by some imam about French racism. They know it firsthand. The French and the British are the ones who cut up the Middle East into little places that they thought they could control. And in the process of doing that, they favored one sect, one religious sect or ethnic sect over another. They did that in a grand strategy of divide and conquer, and they laid the groundwork for the bloodshed in that part of the world that we see today. France also claims that the Muslim world hates it because it stands for liberté, fraternité, and égalité. But all of that's just for white Frenchmen only. During the whole course of the French Revolution, when they were citing those glorious principles, not one Haitian slave was set free by the French. The Haitians had to make war against the French and free themselves. France claims that it is the great gift to the world because it has a secular government, because it separates church and state. But it's the second largest arms merchant to Saudi Arabia, the most fundamentalist and reactionary state in the Muslim world. And in alliance with Saudi Arabia and with, of course, the United States and Britain, France has waged war against secular governments from Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya and to Syria. And now that war against secularism has come home. And yet the French are crying that evil forces are attacking them because France is a secular state. And oh, yes, the people there like to dance. France is only a champion of secularism for white Frenchmen. In the Arab world, France gives arms to the jihadists in order for them to bring down secular governments. The fact that France has a nominally socialist government makes some leftists in the United States wonder, well, why is this happening? But France had a leftist government, a socialist-led government back in the 1950s and 60s when it was killing 1 million Algerians who were seeking their independence. And there were communists in that government as well, and they went along with the carnage because by and large, the French, like most white Americans, don't give a damn about the rights of colored people in the world, especially their colonial subjects. They don't care that these jihadists who they themselves have financed and nurtured all these years attacked in Beirut and killed defenseless civilians because, well, those are people of color. But France, in fact, was behind the partition of the Middle East in such a way that Lebanon was so fraught with sectarian impulses and divisions that it had to undergo a long civil war. So now Paris is burning and people are wondering why. Well, the reason Paris is burning is because Paris has done more than almost any other country besides the United States to set the whole world on fire.
Well, Glenn, listening to you, it occurred to me to maybe remind people that they might want to check out the classic Battle of Algiers film about French colonialism in Algeria. But I also to also have them maybe not even go back that far, because it was only in 2005, I believe, where a lot of Algerian and African descendants, the successive generations after the colonial period, some even saying the hip hop generations, uprose, and young people were in the streets voicing their concerns with the racism that they continue to suffer as so-called citizens of France and residents of Paris even. So I think it's important, and we appreciate this brief history lesson you've offered here for this edition of the Ford Report.
Yes, when we look at the so-called banlieues of Paris, we see the ghettos of the United States. We can ID that.
Yeah. Well, Glen Ford, thanks again for joining us here at the Real News Network and for this edition of the Ford Report.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here at The Real News. And again, for all involved, I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore saying, as always, as Fred Hampton used to say, to you we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and we'll catch you in the whirlwind.